Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Thomas's Reading Room. We're reading Trip Across the Pond, author Thomas Chptr again. Oh, that's me. And this is the cover of the book for you, the little boy pushing the ship across the Pacific Ocean. Trip across the pond was a phrase used in World War II, meaning that World War II soldiers were going across the Pacific Ocean, across the pond. We're going to start in chapter 11 here, Camp Rainier and the 4th Division. We've been overwhelmed with so many comments and so many questions coming through. We're just trying to answer everybody that we possibly can, so kind of hold tight. Anyway, let's get on with this chapter. It was late in the morning. With the exception of a few clouds, the sky was clear and the penetrating heat from the sun was becoming effective. A group of wee soldiers stood at the beginning of an airstrip. We were waiting to board an old beat-up World War II C-130 two-propeller-driven airplane. After what seemed like a long wait, we were towed to board. We carried our world belongings in our foot lockers and duffel bags, with the exception of my guitar, and placed them on the floor down the middle of the airplane. My guitar stayed with me. Some soldiers were sitting on the floor against the wall of the airplane. Other soldiers, like me, were sitting on the floor leaning against the lockers and duffel bags, facing the soldiers leaning against the wall. I sat on the tail end of the airplane. The pilot started one engine, then the other. The old beat-up World War II C-130 two-propeller-driven airplane began to vibrate and shake as if that flight might be its last. Frankly, some of we soldiers did not care whether it went down or not. To me, the idea of it being in the air seemed ludicrous. When we miraculously left the ground and stumbled into the air, a young soldier facing me had a look on his face that was hard to forget. Thinking to himself, that soldier should not have been on the airplane, nor should he have been in the service in Vietnam. His legs were stretched out across the floor and both arms went straight down with his hands, palm side down, pressed against the floor. His eyes were wide open, to the size of a quarter, and you could easily drop a baseball in his mouth. Although part of me was laughing inside, another part of me wished for that old beat-up World War II C-132 propeller-driven airplane to arrive safely, at least for the soldiers' benefit. The airplane rumbled, shook, as if it would fly apart at any second. The engines roared with a deafening sound and may have cut out a time or two. To summarize the trip, it was one hell of a roller coaster ride, though we landed at Camp Rainier safely. The soldier who sat across from me survived without as much as a drop of his breakfast coming up. A sergeant met us at the airstrip, called off our names, and then we took our belongings and boarded a couple of deuce-and-a-halves. Arriving at our new battalion, I was assigned to a web talk where the mechanics resided. The web talks were much the same as the web talks at the 9th Division, though instead of screens for walls, they had boards. The boards were painted a gray color. Essentially, Camp Rainier was occupying the Michelin rubber plantation, which was owned by the French. It was said to have been the largest rubber plantation in the world. Everywhere you looked, there were rubber trees. Across from the web talks, housing the different companies, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and headquarters, there was a French-made two-story mansion. It was occupied by our battalion headquarters. The outside of the mansion was painted a cream yellow color with red trim. At one side of the mansion there was an overhead and a drive going underneath. The front of the building had a large porch with columns, and above it was a veranda. There was a half-circular drive that left the road, went by the front of the mansion, then led back out to the road again. Around back of the mansion was a walkway with a roof, leading from the mansion to a smaller building perpendicular to the mansion. That building was used for offices. A sergeant gave me a pick and a shovel, then took me over to a driveway and instructed me to smooth out the entrance, exit way. Working hard, doing that job without gloves caused me to create a few blisters in the process. People would walk by, though no one went out of their way to acknowledge me. Later I learned why. After working, pouring the coals to that pick and shovel for a period of time, a soldier came by, and that gave me an excuse for a break. I asked, "What time do people quit around here?" I asked the soldier. Everyone here quits around 4 or 5. He smiled, then walked on. Those hours were never experienced at the 9th Division. It sounded like America or something. I thought, hell, I'm used to working at least until 10:30 in the evening, sometimes later. Taking the pick and shovel over to the mechanic's web talk, I laid them down, then walked to the motor pool office. The warrant officer was sitting at his desk. "Sit down," he said. Introducing himself, I began to tell him that since being in Vietnam, I had not spent much time at the motor pool. Much of my time had been contributed to driving various vehicles and driving for officers. He told me that sometimes they had convoys going to Saigon and he might be able to get me assigned to a deuce and a half. That was not what I wanted to do. There isn't anything that I want to do other than drive for officers. "Well, I'll see what I can do and let you know," he said. Meantime, I kept myself busy clearing that drive and talking to a few soldiers who walked by, making new acquaintances. I learned the 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, was part of the 3rd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, which was at the time under the 25th Division's control. The 3rd Brigade, 25th Division, was under the 4th Division's control, thus creating 2 bastard brigades. Cu Chi was the home of the 25th Division, and Pleiku was the home of the 4th Division. A few units from both divisions made up the base camp called Camp Rainier that sat on the Michelin rubber plantation. We are approximately 4 miles from the Cambodia border, west of Saigon, and in the Tay Ninh province. A day later, the warrant officer from the motor pool came over to where I was standing. He told me to get a haircut, then report to the battalion headquarters. Between the motor pool and the battalion headquarters was a small building where a Vietnamese person, who was a bookkeeper for the rubber plantation, owned and operated a laundry. Next to the laundry was a small barber shop. Approximately 50 feet from the barber shop was our post office. At the barber shop, I sat in a barber chair of sorts, and a papasan began to cut my hair. The cutters he used were mechanical, and there were a few times they pulled my hair. Finished cutting my hair, Papasan began to give me a hand massage across the top part of my back. Then he took my head and snapped my neck. Papasan did a seemingly professional job, and I sure felt good afterward. After paying Papasan, giving him a tip, I walked over to battalion headquarters. The warrant officer was there, and he introduced me to Battalion Major Erwin Pulsifer, who was seated at his desk. Major Erwin Pulsifer was a tall man with a solid build, a crew-cut haircut, and 32 years of age. He looked strong and knew exactly what he was doing. He was always sure of the self. Major Erwin Pulsifer had started the 1st Special Forces Field Forces camp in Vietnam and, among many other things, had not only his master parachute wings from the United States, he also had earned his master parachute wings from Vietnam. Major Erwin Pulsifer briefed me as to the possibility of a driver, as the driver he previously had was extremely busy with other projects. He asked me several questions and told me a few things he needed of a driver. Finishing our meeting, he told me that he would let me know when and if he needed me. I shook his hand and left for the motor pool. The next day, I was instructed to report to battalion headquarters. Arriving, the captain adjutant, Freddie, informed me that I would be driving for Major Erwin Pulsifer and instructed me on duties that were to be carried out. Freddie and I went for a ride in a Jeep that was now assigned to me. Freddie was a likable person, and I knew that he was a first-class bowsheer from the word go. He was not going to bust his ass for anyone. Freddie knew that when he got back to the United States, he would be drifted back to a lesser rank. It was said that he had been passed up for the promotion of major twice. As we traveled, I observed a few bunkers. They were constructed of sandbags with an opening at the front and a doorway at the back. The bunkers created a circle around the base camp, establishing our perimeter, and in front of the bunkers were 4 rolls of barbed wire. Spaced evenly around the perimeter were 50-gallon barrels of napalm with a detonator connected to each. There was a road that went through Camp Rainier, and at each end of the camp there was a village. One village, the major village, was called Dao Tiang. The other I never learned. Driving out one end of our camp, Freddie had me drive to a factory in a maintenance area. The rubber from the rubber trees was brought to the factory in tanks sitting on the back of relatively old French-made trucks. They definitely looked different to me. Somehow, the rubber was transformed into white sheets about the size of a large chamois. The sheet would be loaded onto small boats called sampans and shipped to Saigon via the Saigon River. There was a road that left the factory maintenance area and led to the city of Tay Ninh on the other side of Nui Ba Den, the mountain of the Black Virgin. It was the largest mountain I'd seen in Vietnam. Freddie told me there was a Green Beret camp on the top of it. It was said that the mountain was honeycombed with tunnels and caves dug by the Japanese during a previous war. Once an infantry unit attempted to go up the mountain, so they never got too far. They took a hellish beating and retreated. The mountain was declared a sacred place by the South Vietnamese government, and they would not allow anyone to bomb it. There also were two large hills located next to it. On the Tay Ninh side, at the base of Nui Da Ben Mountain, Freddie spoke of a quarry pit called the Rock Crusher. Large rocks were crushed, then soldiers from the Philippine Islands made roads from the crushed rocks. The Philippine government's involvement in the Vietnam conflict was confined to making roads. They did no fighting, so they were not bothered by the enemy. Freddie sometimes would observe a Philippine soldier in a village having an enjoyable time, not a care in the world, as everyone was his friend. The Philippine soldier was a hard worker, as I later learned, and I thought they did a hell of a good job building roads. They were strict and tough when it came to pulling guard duty. They knew how to work and they knew when to drink. Many soldiers would trade anything they could for San Miguel bottled beer. Bottled in the Philippines, of course. It was 12% alcohol and it tasted damn good. As Freddie continued to fill me in, I continued to observe the maintenance building. It was constructed of tile block, had 8 stalls with tools, and some trucks and cars were parked in some of the stalls. 2 of the stalls had hydraulic lifts in them. One French truck was dismantled to the frame, and every part of the chassis had been painted black. There was not a spot of dirt or grease to be seen on those trucks and cars. Time to leave, and Freddie continued to enlighten me with his bullshit as we made our way back to the battalion headquarters. After dropping Freddie off, I drove to the motor pool, left the Jeep to be checked over, and then walked to the battalion headquarters. We have a letter in here, folks. Dear Dad and Mom, received a letter from you today and have a small chance to write a few lines. I've been busy lately and haven't had a chance to write anyone. Today and yesterday were the first time I received mail since May 9th. So I'm very happy to hear from you. I'm glad you received the package. I feel that I owe you so much that it'd be a small token of my appreciation. And most of all, to make my father and mother happy on their birthday. I know it's kind of hard to remember things in the States, but halftime is on my side. So I am glad that you like the gifts. How about the beret? That's a Vietnamese tank man's beret. Well, here I am finally at the 4th Infantry Division. Quite a difference. Our camp is located in the middle of a rubber plantation. It has had a lot of beautification done to it. The rubber plantation is owned by the French, and there are some rather nice buildings here. The second day I were here, I asked to see my warrant officer and asked who was in charge of our motor pool. I told him I had something on my chest and wanted to ease my mind. I told him of my desire to become a driver. He told me he would check it out and let me know. June 67. Dad, Mom, it's about time I got a letter. A few people know where I am at and what I'm doing. First, if all you have the wrong APO, is it relays it used about 4 days longer. I thought over this car situation, and I think ought to go over to Ames and try some garages over there and see what an estimate would be. If you can't find anything better than Price Motor Company, then go ahead and let them do it, with one exception. No paint, just prime it, and that's all, to keep it from rusting. Then I'll get it painted when I get home. Okay? Okay. It's okay to use the used parts. Don't let them take advantage of me. Watch them. I'm doing okay, I guess, for the place that I'm in. I have 194 days. So I'm getting low there. Won't be too long now. Tell Kevin he has become a baseball player now. That guy has a lot of motivation, I would say. I also received a box from you today. A lot of ravishing things. Must close were right. Love, Tom.